Welcome back to the Legacy Radio Network. You're listening to Everything Financial Radio. We are chatting today with Mr. Karl Denninger. Karl's blog is published multiple times a day. I think that's all he does is read and write and analyze at market-ticker.org. You should check it out. Karl, I read that the dollar is now at a 14-month low versus the euro. So we have a currency, the euro, that appears to be on life support, in my opinion. And we have the Federal Reserve pumping money to the tune of about $1 trillion a year. Seems to be working as far as devaluing the dollar. When does this madness stop, and how does it stop?
The biggest issue that you have with what the Fed has done over the last 4 years, and let's back this up just one moment here. There are a lot of people that assert that the Fed is independent and that end the Fed, for example, the Ron Paul mantra, would actually change things. The fact of the matter is that the Fed exists by regulatory fiat of the United States Congress. Okay? The Fed is therefore a political animal. It was created by Congress. It could be modified or abolished by Congress with a stroke of a pen. Regardless of what President Obama wants, 2/3 of the House and Senate say the Fed's gone. It's gone tomorrow. That's the end of it. So what you have are two handmaidens, both of whom desire to continue the scam of spending money that the country does not have. $1 trillion a year of bond buying is $1 trillion of deficit that the government does not have to recognize through paying market rates. Because if they had to pay market rates, anybody would look at a $3.8 trillion budget, say you're borrowing more than a quarter of it, you're crazy, you're bankrupt. You know, the interest rate is 15%. When the Fed comes in and buys all the bonds, of course, there's no market price discovery, and therefore there is no punishment meted out by the market to a government that is out of control in this fashion. So anyone that believes that the Fed is doing this because they have some concern for the economy as a whole is out of their mind. Where it ends is when the market overwhelms what the Federal Reserve is doing, and the market will overwhelm what the Federal Reserve is doing for the simple reason that doing this, while you can hide the market impact from a standpoint of interest rates, you cannot hide the market impact from a standpoint of devaluation of the currency. So your health insurance costs are going up 15%. There are places in this country where you're going to see a doubling over the next year as Obamacare fully goes into effect. Gasoline is twice as expensive as it was 4 or 5 years ago. Food is going up radically in price. Milk is now approximately $4 a gallon pretty much everywhere in the country. It was $2 a gallon 4 or 5 years back. Things that the common person has to buy are going up in price because people are unwilling to take the risk of having this capital on the sidelines that ends up, this economic surplus, and yet it becomes worth less and less every year. That's monetary inflation. That is the classic definition. So the market will call the curtain down on this, but what we have had so far, the government, is that as people have become poorer, as their jobs have been shipped overseas to China, as they have become unemployed, the government has just stepped up and increased the amount of handouts, which of course increases the deficit. So this spiral continues until somebody stands up and says, I'm willing to lose my job as a representative or senator. I'm willing to be fired in order to fix what's broken with this country, or the alternative is the market throws up and we have a crash much worse than the 1930s.
You know, Karl, when you study history, I like to talk about something called a money cycle. You typically have hard money, gold and silver, which evolves into paper money traded for hard money. And then at a certain point, you get something called a fiat currency, which is backed by nothing other than the fact that the government says it's money and people believe it is. When you look at what happened in the Roman Empire, John Law's France, Weimar Germany, in all those cases, a currency actually failed. Is the U.S. dollar on that track? Will the U.S. dollar at some point fail, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so, and the reason is that you look at what's going on over in Europe right now, and it's the same situation. The European Union is faced with the same problem. Ultimately, they have a welfare state that is not able to generate enough surplus capital in order to cover the expense of the things that the people in their countries wish to have. And so they are, they, for some period of time, have been trying to essentially print their way to prosperity. It never works. Now you're seeing recognition in the market that this isn't working, but the issue is that you haven't solved the underlying problems, because it's very politically difficult to go to the people and say, oh, by the way, we lied to you. It's not that you can't have your free cheese tomorrow. It's that all this free cheese that you've enjoyed up until now has been a lie. It was never real. Telling people that you've been screwing them for 25 years doesn't tend to endear them to you very much. And so this is the challenge that we have in America. This is the challenge that Europe has. But ultimately, the problem with the gold standard or any kind of hard money is that unless you cut off the unbacked issuance of credit, you've solved nothing. In fact, you've made the problem worse, and this is why it tends to be cyclical. If I take the power of credit creation away from all of the banks, there are thousands of banks in the United States, and I hand that power of monetary control to a few hundred people, most of them outside the United States, who own the resources that produce gold in the world, I have consolidated the money power, and I have made it more dangerous and more despotic and more tyrannical than it is now. That's not to say it is good now, it's to say that it can be much worse. So this is the challenge that we all have, is that the hard money peddlers are on the other side of this argument saying gold, 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 and yet that's not the problem. Notice what they don't say is $1 of capital. You cannot lend money you don't have. All credit must be self-liquidating. The only way to guarantee that it always is that you must have capital behind every loan you write. Nobody is out there saying this. I'm one of the only people that's done it, and I'm the only one, as far as I know, in print that's actually advocated a system to get there. And the reason is all these people are trying to enrich themselves in some form or fashion. It's all a scam.
Karl, let me talk a little bit about the dollar status as the world reserve currency for our listeners that may not be aware of what that means. I think about a little over 60% of all international transactions take place in U.S. dollars. So a country would convert their currency to dollars, execute a transaction with another country that did the same. There was a news report out recently that China now, which holds a lot of U.S. treasuries, has now gone to gold-backed trade notes with some of their trading partners in order to bypass the dollar. Does this threaten the dollar status as a world reserve currency, and might we see the dollar lose that status at some point over the next period of years?
Oh, maybe, but I kind of sort of doubt it. I mean, one of the comments I made back, I think it was in 2007 or 2008, it's in my blog talk lead, was that here we have a currency that's backed by 6,000 nuclear weapons and nothing else. And there's some truth. Yeah, I mean, it was one of my rants. But there's truth in that, okay? We have the world's reserve currency because we have a military that is willing to blow people to Mars if they don't do what we want. And that is, that's the old Mao thing. Power comes from the barrel of a gun, right? So I don't see the dollar going away as a means of trade. What I do see is nations becoming increasingly frustrated with the idea that we are going to foist off the cost of our deficit spending on them, which is what all of this does. Okay, and that the devaluation hits them, but they get no benefit from it. The person who gets the free food stamps at least gets something. China gets nothing other than an increased trade. But what if you're not China? What if you're Saudi Arabia? Okay, what do you get out of this? All right, the answer is not a lot. And so ultimately, yeah, there is a shift in trade flows. There is a shift in reserves. But until you have a nation that is stable enough to provide the kind of bedrock that the United States has provided over the last 50 years or so, there's not going to be a big change. And there is no nation today that can assume that role, regardless of what people would like to believe.
Karl, when we start talking about the U.S. economy, I've got to get your comment on this because President Obama's Jobs Council, which has been in existence for 2 years and I think met 4 times, and I'm not sure they accomplished anything, has now been shut down. So what is the best strategy for the administration to pursue if they want to help create jobs in the economy?
Well, they'd have to fix the medical problem, the crazy medical monopoly issues that we have in this country. That's where essentially all of our budget problems are coming from. That's where all of our long-term fiscal solvency issues are coming from. And if we don't address it, it's going to destroy the United States. There is no way around this. This is one of those things that nobody wants to take on because it's the 900-pound gorilla in the room, and it's the guys with the $1 million suits and the Learjets and the lobbyists. K Street is full of these guys. They all need to be thrown out of their buildings, and then the buildings need to be razed. We should turn K Street into Central Park South. That would do a great thing for the country, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. The problem that you have with this is that we have an economy that over time puts on about 4% a year in real terms, and this is over very long periods of time. Of course, right now it's growing at about 1%, but we have medical costs that have expanded just at the federal level 9.2% for the period from 1980 to the present day. And while there are people who say, "Oh, well, look, last year Medicare spending was almost right near the rate of inflation," there have been 1 and 2 year periods where it's been very small. There have been very small increases due to distortions in the law, and then it immediately bounces back, and it's going to happen again. There is no way to fix this without taking that on. That's the only thing you can do. And if you free that, if you stop that, you will have huge unemployment in the medical industry, but it will shift back into the rest of the private economy, and you would see an explosion of U.S. manufacturing, of U.S. corporate offices. It would be absolutely insane. We'd probably put up 10, 11% growth rates for 3-4 years running if we were to actually fix this, because you'd solve the budget problem permanently in the United States, and that would be a tremendous impetus for corporations, multinationals, to come and put their headquarters here, because we'd be the only person who'd actually done it.
Carl, I interviewed Lawrence Kotlikoff a few weeks ago, and his solution, he agrees with you, in fact, that's the medical costs are the big issue. His thought would be to limit medical spending to a percentage of the GDP and tell everyone, here's what you can spend. What's your comment on that thought?
How do you do that? How do you limit medical spending as long as there's an insurance industry that's a racket? This is one of the things. Let me just give your listeners one small piece of how screwed up this is. If you have fire insurance on your house and you have a fire, you don't have to keep paying for the insurance. You paid for insurance during the time you had the risk. The bad thing happened. You get paid. You get to build a new house with the money, right? That's how it works. Same thing with your car insurance. You have car insurance, you wreck your car. You don't have to keep paying for car insurance because you had it during the time that the wreck happened. And besides, the car's gone, right? Okay. Now get cancer. You have health insurance at the time you contract the disease. If you don't keep paying the premiums, they cut off the money. But the insured against risk happened during the time you had the insurance. How is this legal? This isn't insurance at all. All right? But this is just one of many distortions. You have and then you have the cost shifting that goes on with EMTALA, which is a Reagan-era law. You have the cost shifting that goes on across borders, where the United States essentially funds all of the advanced drug and device development for the entire world. This is embedded in the system, and saying you can't spend more than X percent of GDP. How are you going to enforce that? Are you going to come into doctors' offices and stick guns up their noses? The better way to do this is to tear all of these special privileges down. Make the medical industry subject to Robertson-Patman and the Sherman Act. They're right there. We have laws in this country that say that price collusion and price fixing are felonies. You go to prison for them. Okay, not to mention treble damages. Lift those restrictions. Lift the reimportation ban. People say, well, but these other countries will break our patents. What you do is you go to those nations, if you're Merck or Pfizer, and you say, look, we understand that legally we can't stop you from breaking our patents that we have in the United States. But if you do it, we will not have an R&D budget. We will not be able to produce any new therapies, and you can't steal what doesn't exist. So cut it out, or you lose just like we do.
Well, Karl Denninger, the blog is market-ticker.org. Thanks for joining us today, and Everything Financial Radio will return after these words. Stay with us.